So we all have gaps, right? And identifying where the gaps are in your knowledge or your skill set or your awareness of what's going on around you is how you grow, and addressing those gaps. So if I can use whatever we're working on from an improvisational standpoint in a jazz trumpet lesson to address some brass playing gaps, I think that's my job and my responsibility to do that, because that's what I try to do in my own playing.
This episode contains adult language and adult humor.
Since when have trumpet players ever been considered adults?
If you are easily offended by these types of conversations, consider switching to the oboe. Welcome to the Trumpet Gurus Hang podcast. I'm your host, Jose Johnson. My guest for this episode is Graham Breedlove. Graham is a musical chef. Raised in the rich cultural gumbo that is Louisiana, Graham has stayed true to his roots by creating a tasty mix of musical influences. Whether it's cooking on stage with the Army Blues Big Band, blazing with a combo, or spreading the gospel of jazz in the classroom, Graham is certain to get your head bobbing and your feet tapping. So, pour yourself a big glass, pull up a chair, and laissez-le bon temps rouler. Okay, and here we are, another exciting episode of the Trumpet Gurus Hang. And once again, I find myself being drawn to the Washington, D.C. area, to the land of military bands, where I am going to be joined by Mr. Graham Breedlove. Graham, how are you today, my friend?
I'm good, Jose. How you doing, bud?
I'm freezing, man. I'm freezing. It's cold out here on the East Coast today. So
I grew up on the Gulf of Mexico, man. I am cold anytime it goes below 60.
I hear you. Yeah. See, yeah. My mom was born and raised in Mexico. My dad, African American. And so when people ask me about cold, I like, what do you think? What part of my DNA screams, sub-zero temperatures? I am all about the warmth, man.
Growing up in Louisiana, winter meant like I had to put long pants on,
I hear you. So speaking of which, so you're from originally down in Louisiana. So, the music scene down there. I mean, obviously in New Orleans is famous in terms of the legacy of trumpet players that have come from that area and the influence that the music has had down there. When you're growing up, I mean, what were your exposures to music like in the area you were born in?
So you're right. Music is a huge part of the culture down there. And I joke around not really totally joking, tell people all the time that the two things I think Louisiana folks do better than anybody is our food and our music. And so I grew up a couple towns over from New Orleans. I-10 goes right across the southern part of the state of Louisiana, and New Orleans, Baton Rouge, and Lafayette, which is where I'm from, are all in a line there. So it's about an hour in between each place. And I had family in New Orleans growing up, so we were there in and out. But I spent most of my childhood, at least, up into high school in Lafayette. And that's where all the Cajun music and the Zydeco stuff comes from, and all the really, really good food. And so music was a big part of the culture. And my dad was an amateur drummer, so he had a really cool record collection. I can remember being like, I don't know, 4 or 5 years old, and he had all Al Hirt's records. He loved Al Hirt. And I can remember being like a little kid, like a kindergartner, asking for this one album that had a torn corner. That's how I knew which album it was. I said, Dad, can we listen to the torn corner? And he would pull it out, and it was the Al Hirt record that had Java and some of those things on it. Those were pretty big hits for Al Hirt back in the day. So that was my first exposure to trumpet playing. And then just in the community, like you said, it's a big part of the community. There's live music everywhere. All these outdoor festivals during the summer, especially, there was, band after band after band, and a bunch of different styles of music. So I heard a bunch of live music growing up, and for whatever reason, totally gravitated towards that, especially the trumpet players. It was like something about it just grabbed me and reached inside and grabbed my soul and said, I think I want to try that. I want to give that a shot. So yeah, I feel very blessed to have grown up in that environment and around all that stuff, because I try in my playing and my writing today, I consider myself a modern trumpet player. I want to be a forward-looking modern jazz trumpet player, but I want everything I do to still have that Louisiana accent. I still want it to have, like, the earthy South Louisiana, boudin balls and boiled crawfish up in my sound and stuff and my writing. So I've tried really hard to sort of cultivate the accent, if you will, because of having grown up down there. And I guess maybe it sort of keeps me connected, keeps me from getting too homesick if I'm still dealing with my Louisiana upbringing and all of my music too. So yeah, you're right. It's a big part of the culture down there, and I feel really lucky to have grown up around all that.
Yeah. So when you were growing up playing, were you experiencing all those different wonderful musical cuisines? Were you doing Zydeco and all that as well as like the standard jazz kind of stuff?
Yeah, I never played in any of those bands, but I heard them all the time, especially, like around Mardi Gras time, starting in Mardi Gras, which is like, well, we're actually in Mardi Gras season now. It actually starts at the beginning of January. But Mardi Gras itself, of course, the day before Ash Wednesday. So, parades and stuff like that. Sometimes there'd be bands on like the back of a flatbed trailer, or there'd be stages all over town. By the time I was in high school, there was a thing called Festival International de Louisiana. I think it's still the largest French-speaking music festival in the world. And there were groups from all over, basically any place people speak French. So all these African groups would come in. There was some stuff from Vietnam. There was Louisiana stuff. It was really cool. So I didn't really get to play in any of the Zydeco bands or a Cajun band or anything like that, but I definitely heard a bunch of it. You hear it in TV commercials, you hear it in radio jingles. And like I said, all those outdoor live music things, because, when it's nice year round, you can be outdoors, enjoying the outdoors 10 and a half months a year down there for the most part, if you don't mind the heat.
Yeah. And the gators.
Right. Watch where you step.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and to use the maybe the little bit threadbare analogy, it's like the gumbo that is music in the Louisiana. There are so many different ethnic influences in the music that is indigenous to that area, but it sounds like that festival also kind of brought in some of the ancillary roots. If you're talking about bringing in some of the African stuff, which obviously had influence on a lot of the earlier Cajun stuff. But do you find yourself to gravitate towards? I don't want to say. Well, do you find yourself gravitating towards music that is maybe more of an ethnic nature as opposed to a more traditional, what we would call traditional approach to music? I mean, do you find yourself being, interested in these somewhat more different aspects in terms of like rhythmic and harmonic concepts than our typical Western music?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the people I got to play with a couple of times at that festival before I moved and went to college was a man who played the djembe named Mohammed Bongura, I think was his name. Me and a couple of my buddies played with him, and he would teach us original music just by rote, by singing it to us. And so that was really a fun thing that we did at that festival. In terms of what I gravitate towards, yeah, I like the sort of, you use the perfect word for it, gumbo. And I mean, I could sit down with a recording of something that I wrote, and I can point to it and say, okay, I stole that from Buckwheat Zydeco, the Zydeco accordion player, or I stole that from this group Astral Project, that's a modern jazz group out of New Orleans. Or I stole this from, an old CJ Chenier record, or I stole that from the Balfour Brothers, which is this Cajun group, from my hometown. So, yeah, I guess that's a really good question. That sort of speaks to me, and I like the puzzle, if you will. Like, how can I? There's a song that's called Jolie Blonde, which is like the Cajun national anthem. It's about a man who has a beautiful blonde wife, girlfriend, or whatever, and she's gone. And I'm not really sure why that sort of identifies as the air quotes national anthem, but I think it's because of the people that got kicked out of Nova Scotia, and their homeland was they were kicked out of their homeland and ended up in the place infested with mosquitoes and alligators and everything. But I took all of my influences and reharmonized it. So I kept the original Balfour Brothers melody and then reharmonized it using some of my modern jazz background. So that's just one example that I really like the idea of trying to take 2 or 3 different influences and put them into one thing together. So, and most of the time when I'm doing that, it is more of like the jazz or a brass band recording or a Cajun recording or a Zydeco recording. Like I might steal something rhythmically, especially in Zydeco when you got the guy playing the frontois, the washboard, stainless steel washboard. There's some really cool rhythmic things that spurs a lot of ideas and creativity. And so, yeah, that has been a big influence on me. And I try really hard to see how many different ways I can incorporate all of those influences without just, writing the same song over the same groove.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's real interesting because, like, from the jazz perspective, that jazz is, while it is considered to be like a native music style from the United States. This is our our personal style of music that we created. But jazz is and has always been an amalgamation. It's pulling in different musical concepts, and it becomes unfortunate because, as with any art form, you start and it starts being something very original, and then it reaches a point where someone goes, well, okay, that's it. Okay, now this is jazz. And if you start to try to change it, then, no, we're a jazz purist. But I don't think you can be a jazz purist without accepting the fact that jazz is a living, growing, evolving organism that takes all of the cultural influences around it and makes that gumbo out of it. So, and I think that's what's led so many, a lot of the players that I really became enamored with, particularly one being a trumpet player like Don Ellis, who got really into like Indian music because there is that very unique, there obviously the unique time, but also the unique tonal structures and things like that, and then taking that and incorporating it into the things that we had. So, in terms of your approach to composition, obviously you're using your in improvisation, you're using those earlier influences. But have you found some stuff like today that's kind of like, wow, that's a really unique approach, and I would really like to kind of absorb that into my vocabulary?
Yeah, 2 things come to mind. One is my favorite improviser for a long time now is the alto saxophonist Kenny Garrett.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things I really love about Kenny Garrett's music is he's taken a bunch of what people might call like a pop groove, but he's playing it on traditional acoustic jazz instruments. Sometimes there's electric bass, but for the most part, it's upright bass. And so you can hear some of the influences of him growing up in Detroit. And so there's some grooves that one of the things that I find really fascinating is, if you're a trained musician, you might listen to a recording or a concert a certain way, and you hear certain things. You might be identifying some sophisticated concepts like something harmonic or melodic. If you're not a musician, frankly, if it makes you move your head up and down, you feel good about it. You had fun, and okay, I like this band or whatever. Kenny Garrett has found a way to sort of meld both of those together. And so there's like, some really cool grooves and something that, I see like non-musicians moving their head like, man, this is just fun. This is really cool. And I see the musicians like, man, did you hear what he played over that dominant 7 chord, And then the other example of that is that group I mentioned a minute ago, Astro Project in New Orleans. They're led by a tenor saxophonist named Tony DeGrati. And they were a quintet for a while. Now they're a quartet. And they, in my opinion, that's my favorite small group because it's modern jazz. It is harmonically and melodically very sophisticated and very interesting to me. But a lot of the grooves they use, you can tell they're from South Louisiana, man. You can tell they're from New Orleans. And rhythmically, it's really interesting. And I've been to hear them with musicians, fellow musicians, and I've been to hear them with non-musicians. And everybody leaves going, wow, that was really fun. That was cool. So I think, that type of sort of hybrid approach, using some grooves that might not be just, straight ahead jazz, makes it interesting for people who might not necessarily have the formal training to deal with, more complex harmonies or more complex melodic ideas or something like that. And in my experience, if you can make people smile and move their head up and down and feel a little bit better than they did just a couple minutes ago, you can play pretty much anything you want to play.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I know that, it's obvious from just our conversation so far that, music has been an integral part of your life, just from the jump. And, some of us have been lucky to have had that experience where we're either just in a household itself or just in a community or a culture where music is so critical. I grew up, my father was a minister, so music is a huge part of church. But also he used to be a professional musician as well. So, I've just from childhood, it's just, I've always known music and known it in a variety of different respects. But, as someone who's brought up in that culture of music and the cultural importance of music, and now in your position where, and we'll talk a lot more about that in a bit, but, you're in your position now with, playing in a military band. I know that education is a big part of that gig. It's not just playing the charts. It's also educating and spreading music to people. Do you see that that there are pockets of people who just haven't had that opportunity to express, to feel music as such a critical part of their life, and how do you go about trying to entice people or to inject in people kind of the love for music that we've been blessed to have from the beginning?
That's a great question. So yeah, I mean, obviously there are pockets, to use your word, of places where people have not had all the same opportunities as the rest of the country. And then in terms of getting, I guess, growing the audience is one thing. It takes some reaching out on the part of all of us to maybe reach people who might not normally have been exposed to any form of art music. And I find, like, most people's general reaction is, well, if they don't know what they're listening to, well, do you like jazz? No, I don't really like jazz. And then you play something for them and you play like a Louis Armstrong record and they're like, oh, well, I like that. That's cool. And then you might play one of those recordings that I was talking about from a group like Astral Project or Kenny Garrett or something like that. Or they might hear Kind of Blue. And they might hear Miles Davis, So What? And I'm like, wow, that's really cool. I was like, well, so jazz isn't just one little niche. There's so many different things in there that I think each of us has a responsibility to sort of grow the audience, if you will. And I thought of something I wanted to mention back when you were talking about influences and, using the word gumbo and all these other things. I kind of see the art form as like an amoeba. Because I've heard people say, like, so-and-so is a cutting edge improviser or a cutting edge artist, and this is where the music is going. Well, I don't see the music as like a freight train with like 2 or 3 captains up in the front that are telling all the rest of us where we're going. It's an amoeba, and so you could be going off over this way and I'm going this way and somebody else is going, and eventually maybe we'll get to some magical spot in human history where the amoeba covers the entire earth and everybody loves the sophistication of this beautiful music. But I think each of us has a responsibility to sort of push the music forward and to expose other people to it who maybe had not been exposed to it. And there's all kinds of ways to do that, and that can be done in the schools at an early age. That can be done in interacting with people and get them to come to concerts, and I think sometimes it's real easy when you're dealing with an art form to sort of feel like, we're sort of reserved and separate from the audience. And no, it's a give and take. I mean, they're our customers essentially, And if you alienate your customers, you're probably not going to have a very successful business model. But I think the biggest word I keep coming back to is like a responsibility. I think each of us that has been doing this for a while has a responsibility to cultivate the art form. I do a lot of teaching, which I really enjoy. I've been on the faculty at a few colleges, and I do a lot of guest soloist appearances where I go out to a college for 2, 3, 4 days and play with their big band and do some presentations. I might teach arranging. I might run some rehearsals. I might teach a class on improvisation, and just talk about the art form and talk about the music and talk about my experiences in the music. And a lot of times it's for music majors, so they've been exposed to a lot of it, but they may not necessarily have been exposed to like my little slice of the universe. Here's what I like, and your teacher's a good friend of mine, and here's what they like, or something like that. So I think one of the big responsibilities we have is the education part of the music too, of just helping to grow the awareness. And part of why I think art music, not just jazz, but any art music, maybe is not as popular as what you can find on pop radio, is that I don't want to say I sound like a snob if I say it's more sophisticated, but in some ways it is. And the more complex or sophisticated something is, the less people are able to deal with it. And I don't like the way that sounds, because it sounds snobbish or elitist. So I think it's incumbent upon us to sort of explain why this is not too complex for everybody. This is not too sophisticated just because you don't have a master's degree in jazz theory. You can still enjoy this music or something like that. So I think the education and the outreach and the growing the art form is something that we all have to take part in.
Yeah, well, and I think you hit on something really important there, that when you think about it, you like right now we talk about jazz as being art music as opposed to popular music. But there was a time when jazz was popular music.
Yep.
It was the top 40 of the day.
Oh yeah, Louis Armstrong was a rock star, man.
Yeah, but I forget who I was talking to. It was one of the hangs that I did, one of the episodes. I need to have better transcripts. But we were talking about jazz and kind of like where it lost its popularity to a degree was when it became a little too heady for the audience, that it became more about let's show our compositional and improvisational prowess, and it became more about showing off that than it was about connecting with the audience. And so there's always space for that. I think there's always space for people that are going to push boundaries and that are going to try to do the more complex concepts and moving the art form forward in that direction. But like you said, ultimately you're talking about a consumer kind of relationship, and if you're not able to have an audience that can understand and appreciate, not necessarily understand, but appreciate what you're doing, then you don't do the art form justice, because if there's no one to consume it, then it's kind of pointless. So in terms of your playing, and how do you walk that fine line between the challenge of sophistication, of pushing your boundaries, and maintaining that kind of direct connection with the average listener?
So, again, getting back to that sort of best of both worlds, where you can, maybe have something pretty sophisticated and heady, I like that word, harmonically and melodically, but over a groove that might appeal to somebody who's maybe doesn't have the background. But I think another way to do something like that is in your programming. So if you're doing a concert somewhere and everything on that concert is like D flat major 7 sharp 11 over C or something like that, and it's all like quarter note equals 300 and real angry and loud and just bashing the listener in the face with it, even I don't want to, I love that sound. And even I don't want to listen to an hour of that. So I think what you can do is in a program, for instance, if you're putting together like a set at a jazz club, and an hour, generally, let's say 6 or 7 tunes for a small group or something like that. Pretty typical big band concert that we might do might be about 9 or 10 tunes. But if you can challenge maybe the audience's ears or their comfort zone, maybe with one composition, maybe the next one needs to be like, straight ahead, a blues at a medium tempo, or somebody's just playing some real nice swinging lines or something like that. So there's like a balance. I think too much of anything, I don't think anybody wants to hear, just like straight ahead swing for an hour and a half either. I mean, if you vary the tempo and you vary what you're doing with the tune, then yeah, but you know what I mean? There's so much more to this music than just that. So I think you can kind of have a little bit of ebb and flow with what you can do. And so if you're putting something that's real cutting edge and brand new and sort of real challenging for both the musicians and the audience, then maybe the next song needs to be a little bit more of a like, okay, now I can shut out. Let's listen to Splanky or something like that, because Splanky is incredibly sophisticated too. Yeah. It's just in a different type of sophistication. It's not beating you over the face with, here's how advanced my harmonic concepts are, or something like that. So I think one of the ways you can sort of walk that fine line is in the way we pick out a program.
So is that part of your duties currently in your main gig, or is that just something that you're doing with your small group and stuff like that?
It has been in the past with the Army Blues, you mean? Yeah. So it has been in the past that I did a little bit of musical director stuff, but no, for the most part, I think about that when I'm putting together something on my own. I think about, okay, these two tunes are very similar in their groove, so we should probably not put them next to each other. Or, like I said, this one is really, really kind of in your face and, really sort of aggressive, and maybe something we need to have is a little more relaxed to follow it. So, but yeah, I do put a lot of thought into that when I'm putting together a program of one type or another. Just, I visualize or try to hear in my mind's ear the end of one song and the beginning of the next song, and is there enough contrast there? Is it interesting, or are they supposed to be related or something like that? So yeah, I think there's a lot of thought that goes into how you might piece together a program, the same way you might piece together, a speech or a conversation like this, where you move from one point to the next instead of just taking a radical left turn, where you and I start talking about like carpet samples or something like that, just
Shag, Berber.
Yeah, exactly. So I think, I do put a lot of thought into how to put together a program that hopefully will be interesting for people to listen to.
Do you find yourself doing the same thing when you're structuring a solo, that where you're not like going to be, Mr. Aggressive, outside the whole 16 choruses that you play?
Yeah, right. Yeah, 16 courses in a row. Yeah, I mean, of course, because when I'm talking to students, I equate a solo to a conversation. And when you first meet somebody, you start with like the big picture, small talk things like, hey, where are you from? You have any siblings? What do you do for a living? What kind of food are you into? Stuff like that. It's way down the line in our relationships before you get to like, how you feel about the last person that you dated or something like that, or how your job is going. You know what I mean? You don't start with the real heavy stuff right off the bat. So I wouldn't say that I consciously in the middle of a solo I'm thinking, okay, I got to play less, and now I can play a little more, and now I can play a little more, now I can beat them over the head, and now I got to taper off. It just, because of how much listening all of us have done as musicians, I think that sort of happens on its own. I find I do have to talk to my students about that and tell them that we have to shape a solo just like a conversation. You don't introduce yourself to somebody and shake their hand and then start with like, all the challenges that you've had in your job in the last 6 months, or, the fact that your dog ran away and your truck broke down and your girlfriend left you, like a country song or something like that. I think it's important to sort of introduce yourself musically in the course of a solo, and it has to have a shape for sure.
Yeah. Well, I like that conversational explanation, because I certainly know a lot of people who, as soon as you meet them, they're like spewing their life story at you, and you immediately kind of shut them down. And I also know a lot of soloists who, it's like, every lick that they know is regurgitated, just they're out of the gate, just smacking you over the head with everything. So I like that idea of building the narrative of the story you're trying to tell. So that's a cool concept.
Well, and you make a good point, because in a conversation, if somebody won't shut up and wants to tell you about themselves but has no interest in hearing about you, each of us is kind of like, okay, well, I've checked out of this situation, and how long till my ride gets here?
Yeah.
So yeah, there has to be some give and take, and there has to be, just like in a speech, if you examine like all the great speeches that we've all had studied at one time or another, there's often a pause or a break right after something really deep and profound. And I think that's by design, to give the listener a chance to digest what you just laid on them, and so I think I find my favorite soloist doing that too. There might be something really just killing, and then there might be 3 beats of silence after that. And that's my chance to, wow, that was super cool, and digest what just happened. So just like the back and forth in a conversation, we have to give the other person a chance to be involved, or rest your brain for a second.
Yeah. Well, rest your brain, rest your mouth, one of the two. So how did you end up making this transition into the land of military bands?
The short answer is my wife talked me into it. And that's not completely true, but I knew a couple people out here, and I had like a friend of a friend sort of thing. A couple of guys that I knew in college had studied with a couple of guys out here. And so through that, I'd kind of heard a little bit about the job. And then so I saw an opening come up one time, and was thinking, oh, well, I'll submit a recording and see what happens. Because, wanted to fly me out to DC. It's a free trip to DC. I got a couple of friends out there. I'll go take the audition, but I'm not interested in the job. And then came out and absolutely got steamrolled. I was like, I think I was 21 years old, had no business auditioning for that band, and just got absolutely plastered. I got run over plastered. I didn't get plastered the way we normally, you know what I'm saying. I kind of got my butt handed to me. And then, but the one eye-opening thing was I'm looking around, and because we all have sort of preconceived ideas, I think, of what the military thing means, because we've seen movies that either paint it in a comedic or a very serious, intimidating light. And so I guess I had that kind of idea. And then I got into the rehearsal the first time I auditioned for the band, and I realized it's, these folks are just musicians like everywhere other band that I've been in, and they're just, instead of wearing a tux or a suit, they're wearing a uniform. And so the second time there was an audition, I was still kind of like, I don't really want to do it. I'm not really that interested. And, whatever. I remember how I got handled last time. I got destroyed. I don't really want to do it again. And my wife was like, just go. I mean, what do you have to lose? I mean, sort of musicians are taught to take every audition you can get in front of. And what's the worst thing that happens is you say no to a job that you didn't want, maybe, or something. All right. So she talks to me, and so I go out, ended up winning the job. And even when I got the job, I thought I'd stay in the band for 3 or 4 years and maybe go do something else or move somewhere else or go get a doctorate, teach college or something like that. And then I realized that the job now, the way the military jazz bands in DC are really kind of the closest thing jazz musicians have to a major symphony job. So I got to the end of my first, I think it was 4 years, and I had a nice house in a nice neighborhood and had a car, and my wife and I are both employed and making money in the music business. I'm like, well, this is a pretty good situation. And, next thing I know, I've been in the band for 25 and a half years now. So
that's a nice run.
I've had a good run. Yeah.
A good run. Well, and I've had this conversation with plenty of people. It's like like when I was in high school, I graduated from high school at the end of the 70s. So that was there were still touring bands. I mean, I had a number of friends that were, out on the road with Woody's band or with Maynard's band or things like that. So there was still an opportunity to play jazz in a big band setting and to do it professionally, to have a career doing that. And then obviously by the 80s, that kind of died out. And even, being a trumpet player on a road gig, those gigs started to dry up, so, that ability to not just only have a career, not just have a job, to have a gig, but to have a gig that has the level of longevity that you could have with one of those military bands. That I think is phenomenal. And, also the security that goes on, because as you get older, once you get out of your 20s and you start thinking about things like, healthcare and retirement and that sort of stuff, it's like, if I can play music and have a steady paycheck and bennies, sign me up.
Yeah, when I was in my early 20s, I think I was 21 years old. I went on the road with Glenn Miller's band, which they are still out. I don't know what their schedule is, but when I went out, I spent close to a year on that band. And they, at the time, were doing, I think, about 49 weeks a year, of mostly one-nighters. Sometimes we'd be in the same place for 2 or 3 days or something like that, but mostly one-nighters. And I learned a lot about music on that job, but I also learned a lot about the music business and life. And as fun as it was playing music every single night, I didn't want to spend the rest of my life on the road. And, freelancing in a couple of cities and stuff like that, I didn't want to spend my entire life hoping that the phone would ring so I could go play a gig somewhere and be able to make my rent that month. So, that appealed to me too about the situation. And like I said, after I got here and got entrenched, and, it's a great group of people, and it's a great organization, and it's a great band. Getting to do stuff with like a bunch of big name guest artists and playing in all these music industry conventions and jazz festivals and stuff like that. It's been a terrific life. And I'm actually shocked that we don't get more people applying when we have an opening.
Yeah, I would think that every player that qualified and some that didn't would be all over that. But you were just you guys were recently at Midwest, weren't you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we were in Chicago last month playing the Midwest Conference.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, and those are fun, because you're playing for an audience of educated musicians. Those are all music educators of one level or another. Basically elementary school through college professors. And that's, again, that plays into the education part of what you asked about a minute ago. So one of the things we do that seems to be appreciated is we'll do a regular performance one night as like the closing act of a jazz night or something. Then the next morning we'll read the publisher's new music for student ensembles. So you have a professional big band up there reading charts that are aimed at like middle school bands or high school bands. And these directors come and they get to hear, that's cool. I like that chart. I'm going to write that title down and order that this year. Or so that's another part of what we do, is sort of that outreach to the educator community, the people who, pardon the pun, are in the trenches in the front lines every day, slogging away in a middle school band program or something and doing some really important and challenging work. So yeah, we were out at Midwest for that. It was a lot of fun. Again, whining about the cold. You send a guy from South Louisiana to Chicago in December.
Yeah.
But this year it was like 60 degrees. So I still had to wear a jacket. But it could have been way worse, because I've been up there when it's like 8 degrees with a 30-mile-an-hour wind too.
Yeah. I've never been to Midwest, and that's one of the reasons why. It just No desire. So the section that you're working with right now, who are the guys in the crew?
Well, so you met Josh Kaufman. You said you had already done one with him. He and a guy named Ken McGee split the lead book. And then the other three of us are sort of split up the solo book. So it's me and two guys that have been in less than a couple of years. There's been a lot of turnover in the organization because we had pretty much the same group for close to 15 or 16 years before, without, one or, like a couple of people retired over the time, but the basic core was together. And the other two jazz players is a guy named Alec Aldred and Chris Burbank are the other two guys. So really terrific players. And actually, you should have all these cats on your podcast, man. They're great people, great musicians.
Drop a hint. give them my contact information. I want them on. Yeah, yes. That's my goal, is to get through every player in the greater DC area. So.
Oh man. Okay. Well, then I'll remind me. I've been here a while. I got everybody's number, man.
Yeah. Well, and I've had the conversation, with Josh, and I had Kevin Burns on the show, and I've known Kevin and Brian McDonald for a while, and prior to doing the podcast, and had a chance to just hang at the restaurant / bar. With several of these guys, but I've always found the military band situations real interesting because of the level of I guess the best way to say it is a kind of unselfish way of dealing with things. I think the first time I heard about it was when I was studying with Vaughn Nark for a while, and Vaughn was telling me a lot about the way they approach things in the airmen in terms of splitting up duties and things like that. And it seems like you have so much talent, and there seems to be a very conscious effort to distribute the workload amongst everyone, so that it's not like someone saying, I'm the lead player, I can play the lead book, or I'm the soloist, I have to get all of the features. So how do you guys manage that in terms of working together in that kind of a situation where there's that you all have alternating responsibilities?
So, well, we're lucky because all five of us get along really well. So that, in a lot of ways, there's a lot of like, hey, do you want to play this? Yeah, sure. Okay. If you don't want to, or there could be like, hey man, I was just checking out a recording of this. Do you mind if I play this? Sometimes the guy, like, hey, cool. And, like the two newer guys I just told you about, Chris and Alec, one's been in less than a year. One's been in about 2 years. So I kind of went on a long period for probably close to, 8-10 months, where I just passed any solo that was in my book. I passed because I just wanted to hear those guys play. It's like, man, I played 1 million solos on 1 million songs in this band over the year. So I want to hear the new guys do it. We hired you guys because you're so great. So let's do that. So I remember a guy doing that in the saxophone section years before, when a couple of new guys came in, and he's like, you know what? I don't need to play any solos for the next 6 or 8 months. Just let those guys do it. So, and that was a lot of fun. Just, there was less pressure on me because I would just show up. It's like, well, I know I don't have to solo on this. I'm going to just stand here, play third, and listen to the rest of these guys. But it made me feel good to just, share some of that load and, hey, you just got here. I know a lot of times it's like trying to drink water from a fire hose. But here, I'm throwing this song at you. I'm throwing this song at you. I'm going to throw this one at you. And then we've kind of, now that everybody's sort of been here for a while and we're sort of kind of settling into the groove, things that had traditionally been in one book or another have sort of found their way back there. And we're all sort of splitting it up. But the shortest or most concise answer to how do we handle the workload is we're just lucky that everybody just gets along and there's no real ego. And I think each one of us enjoys hearing the other four so much that it's never a thing like, I'm not going to pass this because I'm playing that, not him. It's just so much fun to hear the rest of those guys. And it's inspiring. I mean, you were talking about how much musical talent is in the DC area. That I think it's great that all these guys that we hang out with and that are friends with are like these amazing players, you know. So I enjoy passing stuff to those guys just so I get to hear them.
Yeah, I mean, it's you're having your own little private concert back there, so you know.
That's right, best seat in the house.
Yeah, that's great. So when you guys are like, I mean, I know COVID just completely screwed the pooch for pretty much all of us in the performing space. But when you're in rehearsal, how much interplay do you have in terms of establishing sectional concepts? I mean, is it primarily the lead player who's setting it down, or is there a level of democracy in the back of, you know, having, you know, input into how you might want to phrase certain things or approach certain things?
Generally speaking, it's kind of the lead player's job to say, hey, that's off on one. But a lot of times if it's not clear in either the writing or we've read something through a couple of times and it's been different, me or one of the other guys that's playing an inner part might say, hey, in measure 30, what are we going to do there? Is it going to be off on one? Or, you know, so there is kind of a little bit of back and forth. I mean, if I had to guess, probably more often than not, it's one of the two lead players saying it needs to be off on one. But, you know, as a guy who writes a fair amount for big band and for small group too, I was always taught that your writing needs to be clear as to whether or not it's off on four or off on one. So there are things you can do as an arranger or as a composer that there's not really any question as to whether or not it's off on four and off on one. So that saves rehearsal time, not having to talk about it. So, but for the most part, that would probably be one of the lead players making that decision, unless it wasn't clear by about the second or third time through, and then one whistle ask.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's always good. So, you know, you talk about, you know, your arranging and composing and, you know, obviously playing in the big band, but, you know, also doing small band work, small, you know, combo and stuff like that. What do you have a preference? I mean, I know you love all of it, but, you know, where do you feel like you really are most at home?
Wow. I actually do like all of it. I mean, I'm not copping out or dodging the question, because I just love playing the trumpet and I love being around musicians and music. I guess if I had to pick, most of us who are improvisers would probably say a small group, because there's more freedom in that. But, you know, I just like the physical trumpet playing part of it too. And there's nothing like playing in just a screaming, slamming big band. And I tried to stay real versatile early on in my younger years when I first got here. So I played lead in the band by myself for about a year. I played second in the band for a long time, and now I generally play third. I'm gradually working my way down, you know, and then by the time I can get to be fourth or fifth, and then I'll just sneak out the back door and they won't see me anymore.
There you go.
But yeah, I mean, I guess if I had to choose, I would say, you know, if I could write my own script, it would be in a small group, but I would really miss playing in a great big band if that's all I did was playing small group stuff.
Yeah. Well, I guess a better way of, I should have phrased that question more of like, you know, what do you enjoy about those different aspects? You know, because obviously, like you're saying, you know, with a small group, if you're an improviser, you know, you have more freedom, you have more flexibility to do those sort of things. The big band gives you that energy of you know, being there. Plus, you can step back a little bit too from time to time, pass those charts over.
Yeah, totally. And like, as far as the big band, what I like about that is the brass playing part of it. It's like, you know, the endurance of making it through the shout chorus, even if I'm playing an inner part or something like that. The actual physical trumpet playing part is a lot of fun too. Even if I'm not soloing on any tune on a concert, you know, just being in the section and being part of that, you know, a 5-person section that's just banging away. And, you know, when things are really clicking, it's just so much fun.
Yeah. Well, you know, I think to some degree, being a section player has become a lost art. You know, and there, you know, when you start talking about building a skill set as a trumpet player, it's like, well, are you going to be a lead player? or a principal player if you're, if you're in the symphonic world, and these are the, you want to have the range, you want to have the sound, you want to have this, or hey, you can be a jazz player and you got to work on your jazz vocabulary, but sometimes I feel like there's not enough emphasis put on the unique skill set that you need to be a good section player.
Yeah.
So as someone who's, as you said, you've played the lead book, you played the second book, you're obviously have been doing the solo stuff. What do you find as being the most challenging aspect of doing those inner voices?
Well, yeah, there's a couple things, and I agree with you. It is sort of a lost art, and it's, I'm sure you've been in a situation, right, where you played with somebody who you knew was a great player, but like they're missing all the cutoffs, or they're playing a note long when everybody else is playing it short. So, that's kind of disappointing. In a lot of ways, it's really hard to be on top of all that stuff because you got to concentrate pretty hard. And assuming that the lead players are being consistent and phrasing things the same way they did last time we played that passage. There's a lot of truth to what you said, that it's a lost art, because I think a lot of us would maybe say I'm a lead player or I'm a soloist. Well, but yeah, on this song, you're neither. On this song, you're playing third and you just stepped in another hole. So, that one's off on 4, or, those type of things. But that is a little bit of a lost art. And that is a very challenging aspect, because you have to have such a keen awareness of what's going on around you, in addition to obviously being able to play your own part. I mean, if you're playing a challenging eighth note line, you got to be able to play your own part, but you have to really be listening to what's going around you for pitch, for releases, for articulation, all the stuff that, makes playing in a great ensemble so much fun, is when everybody's kind of focused and on the same page and got all that stuff happening. So, that's, in a lot of ways, that's as hard as being a great soloist or being a great lead player, is being, that level of concentration on every song through the entire concert. It's almost like being in a recording studio, the level of focus you have to have.
Yeah. And it seems like there's, depending on what you're doing, it's also understanding where your voice fits in the grand scheme of things. When you're the lead player, you're the lead player, you're the tip of the spear sort of thing. But understanding how your part fits in with everything else, and shading your dynamics to place your part exactly where it needs to be, not only in terms of pitch, but also where it needs to fit in terms of the total dynamic spectrum. I think that's a great section player just understands when to push it, when to back off, and to create the most opulent sound of a section.
Yeah, that definitely, and like I said, I'm sure we've all been around situations where somebody's standing next to you and you can tell they're just not paying attention to that sort of stuff. And another added bonus of playing an inner part is, I think in some ways it's affected my writing, because you might be playing something and like, wow, these two notes sound really cool together. What is that? I want to walk over and see. I don't have perfect pitch, so I have to walk over and see what's happening on the bass player's chart or on the piano player's chart. Oh, wow. Okay. So that color, the note, the way the voicing was, the note that I had and the note that the person next to me has, but without the awareness to listen to stuff like that, which is the same awareness that, will let you know that you were too loud, like you said, or you missed a release, or you're playing a short note when everybody else is playing long, or vice versa. That awareness is a really important part of doing that job, for sure.
Yeah. So, once you reach that point where you've mastered the 5th book and are sneaking out the back door, what do you see as the next phase of your career?
Well, likely my wife and I would want to move somewhere warm. And people, she's got family in Wisconsin and Minnesota, and they laugh at us for thinking that DC is cold, but no, I love teaching. So I would like to have, I'm on the faculty at George Mason now, so I teach there. I would be into ramping that up, expanding that, and doing more of that. Or if there was a full-time position somewhere, in a warmer climate, I would love to do that too. I enjoy the music so much. And like I said, I think all of us that have been doing this for a while have a responsibility to shepherd the art form forward. And a big part of that is helping to facilitate younger people chasing their hopes and dreams. And I really love helping out with that and being a part of that. So I could get out and retire to a really fun, challenging teaching job somewhere in a city with good food.
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah, there are other things you have to consider besides the warmth. So, as from an educational standpoint, whenever I have a conversation that gets into education, I always feel like there are people who just want to perpetuate the teachings that they have been given, by their mentor or whoever. It's like, just keep it going that way. And then there's other people that are actively looking to expand upon pedagogy and, try to fill in the gaps that maybe that they had in their life, the missteps that they've taken. So with your approach to teaching, what do you see are kind of like the big holes that exist right now in music education, particularly for trumpet players and jazz players, more specifically?
Yeah, well, I don't know if I would call it a big hole, but I think it could be if we allow it to be. One of the things that I've noticed in about 25 years of listening to auditions here and in my own teaching is with the rise of the jazz major, let's say, at an undergraduate institution. It's great for the art form. It's terrific for the art form that formal study is happening and that you can go take a trumpet lesson. You can take a jazz trumpet lesson the same way you would take like a classical trumpet lesson and deal with orchestral excerpts or something like that. What sometimes I feel like I have to balance in my own teaching and what I've heard sometimes in hearing some of the young people that come to audition with us is sometimes we can spend so much time going into the weeds on the improvisation part of being a musician. We're talking about melodic concepts or, this harmonic or melodic idea or chords and scale relationships and all of the theory that sometimes we don't talk about the fundamental brass playing as much as we should be. The actual process of producing a sound on your instrument is the tool you use to express all that other stuff to the audience. So you can have the most in-depth harmonic and melodic concepts and the most sophisticated stuff going up on your brain. But if you don't have the chops to execute any of those ideas, you're going to kind of be dead in the water. So I try and approach in my teaching, if we're playing, let's say we're learning like a bebop head or something like that, something that Dizzy would have played, just like in a classical etude, you get to a point like, oh man, this interval is really kicking my butt, or this fingering thing is not happening. So we'll stop and make an exercise out of whatever that challenge is. And you used the word gap before. I really like that word because one of the ways to grow the quickest is to identify where the gaps are. And I don't like to call it a shortfall or a shortcoming or, a weakness or any of those sort of things, because those have an inherent judgment, value judgment attached to them. So we all have gaps, right? And identifying where the gaps are in your knowledge or your skill set or your awareness of what's going on around you is how you grow, and addressing those gaps. So if I can use whatever we're working on from an improvisational standpoint in a jazz trumpet lesson to address some brass playing gaps, I think that's my job and my responsibility to do that, because that's what I try to do in my own playing. Because I have heard some students come in and just play beautiful lines, like their harmonic concept is really just super cool, but they can't play outside the staff, or they're playing with a really thin sort of pinchy sound, or they're playing a mouthpiece that's way too big and there's nothing but air in their sound. So, the problem with that is then that's all you hear is the gaps in the brass playing. And I have trouble getting past that to listen to, how amazing the melodic ideas might be. I liken it to, I mean, that's your voice, like I said. So I could have the most brilliant information to lay on you, but if I talk like SpongeBob when I'm saying it, you probably don't want to hear it, or it's going to at least affect your ability to process what I'm delivering. So I think one of the challenges that we have in jazz education is keeping that fundamental brass playing part of it, particularly in the trumpet, like you said. Keeping that as a real important part of every individual lesson is something I try really hard to do. And sometimes, we just go so deep into a rabbit hole talking about like triad pairs or something like that we don't have time to talk about flexibility exercises. But that's one of the biggest challenges that I see in our educational world right now, is that balance.
Yeah. Yeah. I kind of think about it like a Venn diagram, so you've got the technical aspect of playing, the brass mechanics. Mm-hmm. Then you've got the heady stuff, the theoretical understanding of harmony and rhythm and things like that. And I think sometimes a lot of players are happy to just be with those two, like get your technique and understand the theory, but missing like that third component, which is having something to say. And I think that because that's the stuff that comes with experience. Mm-hmm. And not to sound like old and crotchety, even though I am both. But I think that's why, it's a difference between, like, I think any artist, if they go back and they listen to the earlier stuff, they usually are going like, yeah, maybe I had the chops, maybe I had the thing, but I just didn't really have anything to say. And it's that life experience that gives you, something of importance that you're trying to communicate with your music. And I think that when you reach that point where you've got something to say, you have the understanding, the vocabulary to say it with, to express that idea. That's your understanding of the harmony and the rhythms and stuff like that. And then you have the technical ability to execute that. That's when the magic happens.
Yeah. So how do you think that is maybe something that's related to maturity? Because I've heard a bunch of young people that have amazing chops, and they're going to show you that they have amazing chops. And it's almost like, I heard a joke one time that said the definition of a gentleman is a man who knows how to play banjo but chooses not to. So, a couple of my banjo friends don't like that one, but the whole point is like, okay, yeah, there's all these tools in the toolbox, but I don't have to use them all the time. Or you might have an impressive vocabulary, but you don't need to always walk around using all these gigantic polysyllabic words just to show people how impressive your vocabulary is. Sometimes it's okay just to say, yeah, all right, yeah, I hear you.
Yeah.
Do you think maturity plays a part in that sort of restraint, I guess?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's maturity. And, and maturity has nothing to do with age, because, I mean, I'm 60 and I'm probably the least mature person you'll ever meet. But, it's.
I don't know, man. I'm going to go watch Tom and Jerry after this.
Well, and I'm just kidding about that. But it's. Yeah, I do think life experience has something. And I know some young cats that are, they're old souls. Josh being one of them. He's, he is an old soul. He has a musical maturity that far surpasses his age. But I think a lot of that is also because of the fact that, when he was younger, he was listening to a lot of old school stuff. So he has that mentality. But I, especially like in the jazz world, because yes, that's more what I'm, jazz and pop are my areas. Classical, I'm a fish out of water. But I think because of the expressive nature of jazz, life experience has so much to do with it. Jazz and blues, where it's, you're taking the joy, the pain, the loss, the gain, you're taking all of those things and you're expressing it in real time, as opposed to like through a composition where you have time to think about it and make it, what you want it to be. When you're real time trying to express yourself in a way that touches the audience, that only comes through experience. How can you make someone understand longing or pain if you haven't experienced it yourself? So I think that when you reach that magic point where you've got the life experience, the technique and the concepts. I mean, that's kind of like, hip hop to me. Love it or hate it. When you listen to the lyrics of someone, not just spouting off the latest crap, but someone who has actually lived, come through some hard times and experienced some stuff. When you hear them talk about it, you can go, okay, that touched you because it came from a place of being genuine, not just talking about the bling or the whatever it is. It's just when you're hearing those real world experiences come out in the music, it has a different effect on you as a listener than just someone doing something like that, pulling something out of the whatever. So like as a musician, as a trumpet player, can you identify how that maybe has happened to you, how your experiences have influenced your improvisation, your compositions?
Well, I definitely hope I've gotten more mature over the years in terms of knowing when to restrain myself. Not every solo needs to show people how great your high chops are or how fast you can play or something like that. So I hope I've gotten more judicious in the way I approach playing music. And as far as composition, I think one influences the other, So, and again, like when you're writing a chart or writing an arrangement, not everything has to bash the listener over the head with how smart you think you are. So there's an element of restraint there too. And it's, again, using the language analogy, I forgot what the number is, but like the average American knows like 20,000 English words or something like that, whatever the number is. And never do we use all 20,000 of them in a single day. I mean, we use a fraction of that. So sometimes, saying, Miles Davis saying less is actually saying more sometimes with that sort of stuff, or by, hitting somebody with something and then backing off and letting it sink in. A lot of times the silence is more profound than whatever however sophisticated you feel what you just played was. This is maybe the silence is the more sophisticated part of it. So I think there is an element to growth, maturity about that, like you said, that only comes with time.
Yeah. Well, hopefully one day I will mature enough to be a decent soloist.
You and me both, man.
All right. Well, we have a few standard segments that we need to get through. And,
okay.
And our first one is brought to us by my good friend Michael Barkley of Barkley Microphones, and this is called Sound Off. And in Sound Off, we want to talk with you briefly about what approach you take towards developing the right sound for the job, and especially as an educator. What kind of advice do you give people to developing their unique and best sound?
Yeah, well, so I worked really, really hard when I was younger. I shouldn't say worked. I continue to work very, very hard because I think your sound is really about the most important part of being a brass player because, like I said, that's the first thing people hear. And if it's pleasant to listen to, you're going to be more effective as a player because people want to listen to it. In terms of how to develop that, the only way I know how to develop that is to have what you think is your ideal sound in your head. And the only way that ideal sound is going to get into your head is if you've done enough listening for all the people that have come before you in the music. And you will gravitate along the way to a couple of things that speak to you. So as a kid, growing up in Louisiana, I was really into Wynton in the 80s. And when he kind of had us sort of gravitating towards a darker, warmer, fatter sound from there. And that was like almost like my gateway into, Clifford Brown. And some of those people that played with this really warm, sort of dark and fat, just, beautiful. I would listen to some of those guys just play a whole note in the middle of the staff because the sound was so beautiful. So the way to develop that concept for a younger musician would be to have done enough listening that you know what you want to sound like, and that not only do you know what or who you want to sound like, and I'm talking just tone quality at this point, like somebody plays a whole note and you can identify who it is. Not only do you know who or what you want to sound like, you can actually hear that in your mind's ear. And eventually, regardless of whatever equipment you're using, eventually that will come out of the horn, but it has to be in here first.
All right. Get it up here. Get it up in your head. Which it would be nice if I had anything in my head some days. So our next segment, this is Geared Up, brought to us by Venture Mouthpieces, where technology, design, and craftsmanship intersects. And if you're in the market for a new mouthpiece and you want to check out Venture, use the code Trumpet Gurus 21 and get 10% off your order. So we're looking out for you here. But Geared Up is about gear, of course. What discussion between two trumpet players would not be complete without talking about gear, but not just like, hey man, what mouthpiece, what horn are you playing, but mostly about your concepts of gear and how you go about determining what gear is right for you, and hopefully the advice that people can get on how to find the gear that's right for them.
Well, so again, that goes back to me of conceptually, what do you want to sound like? What/who do you want to sound like? If you want to be a lead player, you probably aren't going to play on a gigantic mouthpiece on a real heavy horn with like a real thick bell or something like that. So knowing what you're into and what your goals are is a big part of it. And then once you find something that works, I've always been of the mind, I'm not a huge gearhead, and some of the guys in the section give me grief because I'm like, yeah, what is the backboard part? I mean, if that's fatter, what does that do? If it's thinner, what does that do? Because I'm half the time I'm like, man, I don't play well enough to know the difference because I can't tell the difference from one to the next, I guess. So for me, again, with that concept of like, that warmer, darker, fatter sound of guys like Clifford Brown with strings, or the album that Wynton did with his father where they played all the ballads, Standard Time Volume 2 or Volume 3. That's kind of those are my favorite trumpet sounds. So for me, when I was selecting gear, I was always trying to go in that direction. And I don't know what your rules are about specific names or brands or anything like that.
Go for it.
Okay. So because it's a funny story, and maybe that's why I'm attached to it, because it's a funny story. The horn I'm playing on is a Bach Stradivarius trumpet that was built in the early 80s. And when I was on the road with Glenn Miller's band, I found this trumpet on the floor in a pawn shop in Mississippi for $200. It looks like it's been around the block a few times too. And I don't know how detailed your camera is, but there's like places where my knuckles have worn into the brass, and I got a big old like dent right here from where my thumb sits all the time. But it's just comfortable, it's like a favorite pair of shoes or a favorite hat. And I've always been of the mind that, very few of the problems are here. Most of the problems are here and here and here. Actually, a lot of them are here.
Yeah.
And then I've gone through a couple different mouthpieces over the years. They've all sort of been the same. But even in like the last 25 years, I've probably only owned 4 instruments. And, when I first got in the band, I was playing on this Bach. I've had this Bach since 1992, I think, 1991, 91 or 92, something like that. And I ventured away for a couple years. I had 3 other horns that I can count. And then I've always ended up coming back to this because, this just gets me the closest. And I'm one of Bach's clinicians and endorsers anyway. So, the problem's not on the horn or the mouthpiece. I have tweaked mouthpiece stuff a little bit. I use one of Pickett Brass, Peter Pickett's mouthpieces, and you can change the backboards out from under those because that will affect the way it feels here and the way it sounds and the way things respond. But again, I try not to go too deep into a rabbit hole. I know some guys that own 50, 60, 80 mouthpieces. I think I own 4. And that's because I own a trumpet mouthpiece, I own a lead mouthpiece, I own a classical mouthpiece, and I own a flugelhorn mouthpiece. and I own a trumpet flugel. It's like a trumpet mouthpiece with a flugel cup. So I lied. I own 5 mouthpieces.
Man, you're crazy. You're crazy.
I know something wrong with me, man.
Oh, no. Well, I think that when it comes to gear, it's a lot of times we're looking for something to overcome a deficiency or a gap in our playing, that many times is best served by addressing that in your playing. The equipment's job should just be to make what you're doing easier, but just to remove a level of resistance out of the equation.
Yeah. I heard someone say it's an amplifier at one point. So this is the instrument. This just makes it louder.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I like what you said about thinking about like that comfortable pair of shoes or something like that, because ultimately I think regardless of what you play, what brand you play, you do find something that resonates with you, and it just because the instrument is so intimate to begin with. The relationship that we have with that instrument is very, very intimate, and when you find something that fits, that feels good and gets the job done, then maybe messing with it is the wrong thing to do.
Yeah. And I'm actually a little bit worried. This horn is so old now, and I've got so many worn spots in it. I'm a little worried that there's it's going to spring a leak, and then I'm going to have to start maybe thinking about replacing it or something like that. And anyway, I'm just fingers crossed that it doesn't explode in my hands one day.
Exactly. All right. Well, we have one final segment to go through, and this is brought to us by our good friends at Robinson's Remedies, rapid relief for your sore and tired chops. And this is our Robinson. What was that?
I said, how'd you know? You said sore and tired chops.
Yeah. You know what? You can find any trumpet player and say, "Hey, are you done playing? Are your chops sore and tired?" And the answer will always be yes.
Yes.
Yes. But this is our rapid fire round, and this is a series of questions that kind of bounce all over the place. And Graham, I just need your quickest response. Uh-oh. Could be trouble. And we're going to start with our first question, which is, who's the biggest influence on your life that is not a trumpet player?
Oh, wow. My parents.
All right. What's your favorite book?
I have a favorite genre. I really like the spy novel stuff, but in terms of maybe something that might affect the trumpet playing, there's a book called Talent is Overrated.
It's a great book.
Yeah. So if your listeners know, that one is by a man named Jeff Colvin, and it basically has to do with practice habits and stuff. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Love that one.
Yeah. That and man, I'm trying to remember the other one.
Outliers. That's like
Outliers, obviously, yeah. So I've read all of those books, everything about practice, mastery, success, and things like that. So
any of the Code is another one that's a similar thing. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. What's the worst movie you've ever seen?
That's hilarious. The Piano. And I don't know if you remember that movie. Yep. Harvey Keitel was in it. Holly Hunter was in it. And it was one of those ones that my wife was like, "Oh, I heard this is great. We got to go see this." And I went, and I hated it. And now it's been a running joke. We've been married for 26 years. It's been a running joke that the worst movie I've ever seen is The Piano that she dragged me to. And just for whatever reason, I hated
it. You hated it. Okay. All right. If you weren't a trumpet player, what would you want to be?
Ooh. I love woodworking. I have a wood shop in my garage. I like the creative aspect of it. So I could probably be hanging out with all my power tools, building furniture for people.
All right.
That'd be a lot of fun.
All right. What's your favorite drink?
I like to have a gin martini. I like bourbon. I like craft bourbon, small bourbon.
Ooh.
But I'm sitting here just with a big old thing of water right now. Just got to get through the day first, man.
Yeah, exactly. So what's your favorite craft bourbon?
My sort of go-to is either Basil Hayden's or Woodford Reserve. I don't know if they're craft in the sense that they're small batches or whatever, but and then there's a couple other ones that I like. There's some local ones out here in Virginia that have been pretty good. There's one called Copper Fox that's a small one in Virginia that makes some other stuff, but they just started making a bourbon a couple of years ago that's very, very good.
Awesome.
So I tend to like the ones that are sort of smoother and silkier instead of the like more of a bite, like Knob Creek or Maker's Mark aren't necessarily my favorites because they're more, some guys like the bite and the bitterness. I like the sort of just smooth, the silky sort of thing.
Yeah. Actually, recently had a bottle of the Basil Hayden Dark Rye, which I'm usually not a big rye drinker, but it's an exceptionally smooth rye.
Okay, because rye tends to have that bite, that bitterness. That
this does. Really... This doesn't.
Huh. Okay, I'll give it a shot.
And if you ever run into Kinsey, which is a Philadelphia-based distillery, they have an American whiskey, bourbon basically, a Merlot cask finished whiskey, which is absolutely phenomenal.
Wow. Okay.
You and I need to get together and have some brown spirits, my friend.
Yeah, for sure. And there's a distillery out here called Virginia Highland, I think it's called, and they make something that's a blend of Scotch Highland whiskey and American whiskey.
Ooh.
So it's not quite a Scotch and it's not quite a bourbon. It's kind of interesting. If you can find it up there, give it a shot. It's an interesting sort of, again, with the gumbo thing. It's kind of an interesting combination of flavors.
I like that. All right. You could have a dinner party and invite any three living people. Any three people in the entire world could come to this dinner party. Who would you want to invite?
Wow. I think I would want to have Kenny Garrett, just so I can fanboy and bother him.
All right.
Pick his brain. Let's see. Maybe. I did my undergraduate degree at LSU. I'm a big college football fan, and maybe I would invite Nick Saban to the house, and then I could lock him in the basement, so he can never coach another game for the University of. But he wouldn't get to eat, like I said. He'd be like in my basement, Silence of the Lambs style.
Yeah.
So yeah, Kenny Garrett for sure. Oh man. Trying to think who else I would just like to pick their brain and bother them. There's a whole bunch of them, but they have to be living. So I have a couple favorite actors, but a couple of them are gone. Man, that's something. For sure, Kenny Garrett. What else? Tom Harrell, the trumpet player, maybe.
Okay.
Again, so I could fanboy and pick his brain. And maybe I can get like a composer or somebody in there whose brain, and Maria Schneider, and maybe pick her brain and ask her about harmony and voice leading and, the compositional process that she goes through, because she has a unique voice that's really, really sophisticated.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, there you go. Tom Harrell, Maria Schneider, and Kenny Garrett.
Yeah. Okay, great. Now you got three additional chairs at this table, and you can invite any three people from history. Any three people no longer with us?
Louis Armstrong.
That was a fast one.
Yeah. Again, I'm going to pick his brain. Maybe Duke Ellington. Again, so I could pick his brain and tell people that I had dinner with Duke Ellington. And then, oh man, I'm kind of tossed up. My favorite small group, besides Astral Project, we were talking about, is probably all of Art Blakey's group. So maybe I want to have Art Blakey at the table so I can ask him about just running a small group. How did he keep all those groups together? Logistically, personally, financially.
Yeah.
So yeah, maybe those would be my three guys.
All right. Well, that sounds like a really interesting dinner party, and I'm sure there'll be some bourbon there. All right.
Me and Louis Armstrong are picking the menu.
Yeah. There you go.
Got some red beans and rice for y'all.
All right. Next question for you. Lacquer, plated, or raw?
Raw, just because this horn is so old now. It had lacquer on it when I got it, and it's just gone. It's just gone. I think there's a meant to give you a serious answer. I think there actually is a difference in each of those. And I think the difference is as much mental as it might be physical. If you believe that that horn plays brighter because of the way it's finished, then it probably does. If you believe that horn plays darker because of the way it's finished, it probably does. And mentally for me, because I grew up hearing those Winton records from the 80s and those, when he started playing the monettes that were unfinished, before they got really, really heavy, but basically from like J Mood and Black Codes from the Underground, and then the Standard Time albums, and the red, the one with his father especially. To me, mentally, it feels to me that an unlacquered horn is going to play darker. Whether that's scientifically accurate or you can prove it or disprove it, it doesn't matter. I think it does, so therefore, that's what's in my brain. So it does.
There you go. All right. What's your favorite quote?
Oh, my teacher from grad school, David Baker. I did my master's degree at Indiana, and David used to say all the time. I have a couple from David, but my favorite one is, the only way to expand your comfort zone is to step outside of it on a regular basis. And that was super profound. And then my other favorite David one is, sometimes it's hard to remember that your original intention was to drain the swamp when you're up to your ass in alligators. So in other words, you got to put out whatever fires you're dealing with today before you can look at the big picture, get your head above water. But I love the comfort zone one, because I tell my students that all the time. The only way to expand your comfort zone is to step outside of it. And that applies in a whole bunch of aspects of life, not just music.
Yeah, that's everything. That is everything.
Yes. Yeah.
All right. What is your greatest fear?
Oh, man. Cutting one of my fingers off in my wood shop. Maybe not being able to play the trumpet for one reason or another. Well, I guess I could go bigger picture, like, coming home one day and my wife disappeared. I wouldn't like that. But yeah, I guess not being able to hear music or play the trumpet for whatever, if it was a physical thing here, or, losing a digit or something like that. I think that would probably, my time on earth would be done at that point.
All right. You could be granted one superpower. What would it be?
I would love the ability to make everybody be nice to each other. Like, I could just flick my finger, go stand on the floor in Congress, and all of y'all have to sit down and be nice to each other right now. Or, people on Facebook, that somebody posts something that somebody else disagrees with. And if we disagree, it's because you're a terrible person and you're uneducated and you're a heathen and you're hateful and a horrible human being. None of that. Just, you can have a disagreement with somebody and then sit down and talk about it. And maybe you find common ground, maybe you don't, but it doesn't have to be because, I'm right and the person who disagrees with me is a terrible person. So especially in this kind of political climate where we are now, where it's either, it's like this Boolean digital either or situation. Yeah, I would love to just be able to walk up behind somebody and like whack them on the back of the head, and they have to be nice to whoever they're talking to right now.
I think the whacking on the back of the head part, it would make it much more enjoyable. It
makes me feel better about it.
You'd be smacking a whole lot of heads.
Dude, I live in Washington, D.C., man. My arm would be tired.
Yeah, you would have to have that second, super power of stamina to do that.
Right. Tore my rotator cuff smacking heads the other day.
All right. What aspect of trumpet playing do you feel is the most overrated?
Well, the easiest answer for somebody who, maybe range, but as soon as I say that, it's not available to everybody. So it probably means more to somebody who doesn't have range that comes easy to them. I will say this, from an educational standpoint, the most overrated aspect of trumpet playing is the one that you feel you don't have, because you probably don't need it, you know? So if you feel that, your endurance sucks, then maybe it's not that important. Figure a way to work around it. Or, you don't think you have enough range, then maybe that's overrated. Find a different way to express yourself. So I'll say the most overrated aspect is the one that each individual player feels that they have a gap in.
Okay. What aspect do you think is the most underrated?
I spent so much time I keep saying like it's like I'm done, it's in the past. I spend so much time working on my sound. I think just playing like a second line G in a whole note and making it something that people want to listen to, it's underrated. And I think that's something that maybe a lot of us don't spend enough time thinking about. So I'll say sound, even though I think most people will tell you it's uber important. Maybe it's not as important as it should be.
There you go. All right. You can go back in time and give your younger self one piece of advice about music. What would it be?
More ear training. More ear training, because the chops and the dexterity and the range and the endurance, all that'll come, and we all know how to do that. The ear training was always harder for me, so I wish I would have done. I mean, I do a lot of sitting at the piano and trying to get in there, but I think more ear training would be the thing for me.
And while you're back there, you're going to give your younger self one piece of advice about life.
Again, with the snap the fingers, making people be nice to each other, be nice to everybody, because we all have times that you were maybe less than nice to somebody, or you lost your temper or whatever. I would say that you never know what somebody else is dealing with in that particular moment when you interact with them. So just be nice. And so, be nice to everybody.
All right. And final question for you. What do you want your legacy to be?
Well, I have 3 kids, and I'm very proud of all 3 of them. They're terrific people, and they are way on their way to becoming productive, successful members of society. So, when I'm gone, I would like to see them carrying that on with their children and their children's children. So I would like to know that they're good people and that they're hard workers and they're nice to everybody. So I think that would be a pretty cool thing to have left behind, is a tradition of, being hardworking and nice to people.
Well, that's certainly a good thing to aspire to. And, it like everything else, all the other skills on trumpet, it just takes daily practice.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. Well, Graham, thank you so much for spending time with me today, man. I really appreciate it. There's some great stuff, and I'm sure that you and I will be crossing paths soon. We're trying to work out an actual in-person DC hang. So
cool.
We're gonna have to make that happen.
All right, the first Basil Hayden's is on me, man.
Oh, okay. and the 3rd, 4th, and 5th is going to be on Josh. So
now you're talking, yeah, right.
So again, man, thank you very much. And thank you for joining us for this episode of the Trumpet Gurus Hang. And make sure you like, subscribe, share, do all those other wonderful things that, help us to grow our audience, because, there's so much good stuff out there, so many great players. And this is all about sharing the love and sharing the knowledge. And so we just want to see the trumpet community get bigger, stronger, and, play higher, louder, and faster. So
with a nice sound.
With a nice sound, exactly. So thank you so much once again, my friend. And do what you can to get the rest of the DC cats on this. So
I will talk them up, Jose, man. I appreciate it. I love what you guys are doing.
All right, cool. So everybody, thanks a lot. Peace and slide grease. We out.
Thanks for hanging with us today. This podcast is all about creating deeper connections through our mutual love of music
and the trumpet life. Make sure you subscribe to this podcast and also like and share this episode with a friend. We want to see the hang grow for show. Please support our sponsors and consider becoming a personal supporter of this podcast as well. Remember, for less than the price of a bottle of valve oil a month, you can keep this podcast moving smoothly. The Trumpet Guru's Hang is recorded at the Candy Factory, a co-working space and social club located in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Jose Johnson is the executive producer. Post-production editing is by Mitch Bowers. Our opening theme song was composed and performed by Lexi Signor, and our closing theme music comes courtesy of The Greatest Funeral Ever. Incidental music is by Ethan Swayze and Jose Johnson. Graphic design by Ann Kirby of the Sweet Corps. The Trumpet Guru's Hang podcast is produced in collaboration with the So Good Lancaster Media Group.